I want to talk about hunger today. So, hunger is actually a neuroscience topic. So, this is a behavior that we exhibit when we need food. We've got cues that tell us that it's time to eat. These are hunger cues, and we've got cues that tell us that it's time to stop eating. So, these are satiety cues. And there are actually molecules that we release that help us do these same things. So, leptin is one of these things. So, leptin is secreted from our fat cells. And the more fat cells that we have, the more leptin that we have. And this is a long-term signal to our body that we don't need to eat anymore, that we have enough nutrient stores in the bank. And then there's something called Grelin, which is secreted by the actual stomach. And this actually controls our hunger. And so when we have Grelin levels rise, we eat, and then when they peak, we eat, and then they drop immediately after we eat, and then they rise up again. So these kind of peak all day as we eat. So these are two molecules that are kind of more-ish long-term that control when we eat and when we don't eat, rather than just kind of our stretch receptors in our stomach. So I think these systems are really, really cool because there's so much going on that has to do with hunger. And sometimes as parents, we can forget about it. Specifically, hunger is really important for things like immediate energy needs. And when we're asking a kid to have self-control, if there's been studies that show that giving a child glucose or a person glucose when you're asking them to do tasks that are particularly frustrating or they need a lot of self-control, that you actually do better on these tasks when you've been given something that has glucose in it. So I know there's a lot of stuff that says don't give kids sugar. So glucose is something that carbohydrates get broken down into anyway as a really small sugar. And it is exactly what our cells need in terms of our neurons in our brain. They run on glucose. That is their fuel source. And so just some thought to, if you're asking your child to do something that's hard or if they're having a temper tantrum, one of the things that you can do to kind of head that off is just go ahead and feed them, have that conversation after they've been fed. This works really well with toddlers or preschool age kids, but also, with teenagers as well, to be honest, and sometimes with me. So this is this idea of hangry. It actually has a physiological basis. So this is something that you should take into consideration. I also think it's really interesting that these molecules are there. And anytime you have a molecule in the neuroscience world, you can have something that goes wrong. So you can secrete too much of it. You can secrete not enough of it. You cannot have the right receptors for it. The receptors cannot work properly. And so a lot of these things have been noticed in terms of obesity as well. So sometimes these are just on a continuum where there's a problem in this system. And some people's systems work more efficiently than others. But these cues for satiety or these cues for hunger. So you can have people who kind of run a little bit skinny or they run a little bit on the obese side. And sometimes there's an underlying mechanism that are one of these things that I've already talked about. So that's kind of my 2 cents on hunger. It's just interesting to me that we don't really think about it as a neuroscience system, but hunger is absolutely a behavior that we have, and it absolutely is controlled by the brain. And this is kind of our first kind of look at motivation. This is a really simple motivating, displaying motivation behavior. So if you're hungry, you eat to make the urge go away. It's no different than the more complicated ones. It's just easier to describe. And so we'll move from here into talking about reward. And, if we can have this kind of complexity in a system that's simply about hunger or even about water, which is a really simple thing to get for yourself, how much more complicated does it get when these are things that each person has to make a judgment for about themselves, whether they have value or not, and whether they're going to work to get them. So I think that's very cool as well. So thank you for listening.
Join us every day in May for a new video.